Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just have to say I don't think that patients who are dying are going to be confused, particularly if we say this has not yet been approved by the FDA. Would you agree with that, Ms. Lopez-Baumann?
Thank you for your question. Yes, the Right to Try Act, Senate Bill 204, actually works in tandem with the current FDA process, and that is why Right to Try is only available to patients who have exhausted approved treatments, who are unable to participate in a clinical trial, and why Right to Try only applies to medicines that are already being considered by the FDA and are continuing to be evaluated by the FDA.
And so by the time a patient has gotten to that point, they're fairly well educated on the issues, at least related to their condition and disease.
I think that's true, but I think that the words of Dr. Rizal Kurzrock, who at one point ran one of the nation's largest clinical trials, actually at MD Anderson, explained that the process was so burdensome that they only submitted one application per year. This was a clinical trial of more than 1,000 patients, and to quote Dr. Kurzrock, that there were so many barriers that even at one of the best places in the world and one of the largest departments, that this, as their day in and day out job, it was still very challenging.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I also think that it's important that we do have informed consent. Both House bills have that, and so any language that you might want to provide to make that stronger for us, I would greatly appreciate that, Dr. Siegel, excuse me. But I would appreciate any language that you can provide us. Unfortunately, time is of the essence, so I can't get that language right now, but later if you could provide us with some opportunities. Lieutenant Commander, again, thank you for your service. You mentioned that you hoped that it would be different when your children were grown up. How old are your kids?
Oh, it's on. Mm-hmm. All right. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 7-month-old at home. 3 boys.
Well, I know that's got to be a great joy for you.
It is, and I do want to also throw out there, and I hope everybody hears this. There's this notion floating around that expanded access isn't getting used because people don't know or can't figure it out. I find that deeply offensive. I would say the ALS patients I know are bright, well-informed. A lot of them know more than the researchers and the doctors they work with. And the idea that they wouldn't apply because they can't figure it out, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Back to you, Ms. Lopez-Baumann. What legal protections do patients in the 37 states who have passed right-to-try laws have that patients in other states do not? And we're running out of time, so if you could keep it as quick as possible.
So really what it comes down to is that in the states where Right to Try is now law, it's about allowing terminal patients more freedom to access the right treatment at the right time. And it's not a guarantee, but it is an assertion that patients have a right to medical autonomy. And that bureaucratic and administrative barriers shouldn't be standing in the way. And I'd like to point out that earlier this year, this very own legislative body implicitly endorsed the right to try for terminal patients to seek investigational treatments to save their own lives. Remember little Charlie Gard, who was granted residency to seek an investigational treatment here in the United States. He was granted residency after the UK blocked his parents' right to seek an investigational treatment. And so this has already been implicitly endorsed by your legislative body. We have the vehicle, and it has been vetted, and stakeholder concerns have been addressed. It's time to act.
I'm going to open this up for anybody to send me a response afterwards, but I do want the Lieutenant Commander to respond to this. In your article, I believe it's your article, in the Washington Post, you indicated that in 2014, nearly 25,000 people in France were using investigative treatments through the government's equivalent through the French government's equivalent program, and yet we had less than 2,000. I think that was your reference earlier to the food stamp program.
That is correct.
And what are the differences in the French program that allow them to get access to so many, even though they have a much smaller population than we do, that we don't have?
Well, I think Dr. Gottlieb was 100% correct that it's a supply issue. It's not a demand issue. And I think their legislation allows for the demand, the market, to drive the supply, is what we see there, and we don't have that here. I think this bill is a big step in addressing that.
I appreciate that. My time is up, but if anybody else would like to give me a written response to that of what they see as either pros or cons with the French law versus the American law, I'd appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields.